Good morning, and I hope this week of preparation has been kind to you, even on the days it has not felt like it. Sitting for this examination while the news cycle keeps moving is its own kind of discipline, and I want you to know that showing up here, again, to sync current affairs with theory is exactly the habit that separates a rank holder from someone who merely read a lot. This is the Sociology Desk, issue 51. Today we are working with two Supreme Court moments. One on artificial intelligence inside judicial reasoning, and one on the rehabilitation of trafficking survivors. And I'm going to show you, concept by concept, exactly how to turn both into marks. Let us begin with the first event. On the 2nd of July this year, the Supreme Court set aside an order of the National Company Law Tribunal because the tribunal had relied on case law that did not exist, precedents fabricated by an artificial intelligence tool. This falls under Paper 1, under Sociology as Science, specifically positivism and its critique, and it also connects directly to Max Weber's account of authority. Hold that in your mind, because this is exactly the kind of event you are told to expect in 2026. A live event that becomes the evidence for a classical theory, not the topic itself. Here is the concept you must anchor this answer on. Max Weber said that authority in modern institutions is legitimate not because of tradition and not because of personal charisma, but because officials apply known rules through a process of trained, reasoned judgment. That is rational legal authority. Now, Weber also gave us a second, sharper tool: the distinction between formal rationality and substantive rationality. A system can look formally rational, correctly formatted, properly cited, procedurally neat, while being substantively irrational, completely disconnected from the reasoned ends the law is supposed to serve. That is precisely what happened here. The tribunal's order looked like a judgment. It read like a judgment. But the precedents inside it were invented. Form without verification is not reasoning. It is only the costume of reasoning. If you want one thinker to carry this entire answer, make it Max Weber, and be precise about which of his ideas you are using. Do not simply write, "Bureaucracy is rule-bound," and move on. That is what a 14 out of 20 answer does. Instead, write this. As Weber argued in Economy and Society, bureaucratic domination is legitimate only when officials exercise disciplined, trained judgment over rules, not when they merely reproduce the appearance of rule following. That single sentence, correctly attributed, correctly worded, is worth more than 3 paragraphs of description about what a tribunal is. Now let me put on the examiner's cap for a moment, because this is the slide that actually moves your score. An average script, the kind that gets 14 out of 20, opens by describing the tribunal, describes what artificial intelligence is, describes what happened in the case, and only somewhere in the 3rd paragraph mentions Weber, often just by name, without naming the specific concept. A script that gets 18 or 19 out of 20 does something completely different. It opens with the structural claim. Authority in modern institutions rests on reasoned judgment, not on outcomes alone. It names Weber's formal versus substantive rationality distinction in the very first paragraph. It uses the tribunal order in exactly 1 or 2 sentences as evidence, not as a story. Then it layers a second thinker, perhaps Auguste Comte, on positivism, to show how method without verification is a hollow imitation of positive knowledge. Then it adds a counter perspective, someone like Jürgen Habermas on the life world being colonized by system logic, or Ashish Nandi's warning against uncritical faith in technology. And it closes by returning to the opening claim with a forward-looking synthesis. That is the difference. The event is your evidence. The theory is your destination. Say that to yourself every time you sit down to write a 20-mark answer. Here is a question you should be ready to write on. Is Max Weber's model of rational legal authority premised on an irreducibly human exercise of judgment? Critically examine, with reference to recent encounters between artificial intelligence and judicial reasoning in India. Notice the verb critically examine, which means you must explain Weber's model and then take a position on whether it survives contact with algorithmic decision making. Our second event moves us to paper 2. In Prajwala versus Union of India, the Supreme Court's Victim Protection Plan for survivors of trafficking continued to shape institutional practice through this month, with a compliance review due in September. The court has grounded rehabilitation not in executive discretion, but in the right to life with dignity under Article 21, read together with Article 23's prohibition on forced labor. This sits under challenges of social transformation, violence against women, and it is one of the richest events I have seen this year for one particular Indian thinker. The concept to anchor here belongs to Partha Chatterjee, Civil Society and Political Society. Chatterjee's argument is that in a country like ours, the poor and the marginalized rarely encounter the state as individual rights-bearing citizens of civil society. Instead, they encounter it as populations, governed through welfare schemes, targeted categories, and population-level interventions, what he calls political society. Trafficking survivors have historically sat in this second, more precarious space, receiving protection as a matter of policy, not as a matter of right. What makes this judgment significant is that it tries to convert that governmental relationship into an enforceable entitlement by ordering anti-human trafficking units to function as full police stations with clear statutory obligations. Write this formulation into your notes exactly. As Chatterjee argued in The Politics of the Governed, subaltern populations typically encounter the state not as rights-bearing citizens of civil society, but as populations governed through targeted welfare categories. Once you have that sentence ready, you can deploy it on almost any question about marginalized groups and the Indian state, not only on trafficking. Examiner's view again. A 14 out of 20 script on this question will spend most of its words retelling what the judgment says. The Victim Protection Plan, the anti-human trafficking units, the September review, as if this were a current affairs answer. An 18 or 19 out of 20 script uses the judgment sparingly, in 1 or 2 sentences, and instead spends its energy on theory. It names Chatterjee's civil society versus political society distinction in the opening lines. It specifies precisely which article, 21 or 23, is grounding which claim, because vague constitutional references cost marks. It then brings in a second voice, perhaps B.R. Ambedkar's idea of constitutional morality, to explain why the court is disciplining institutions rather than leaving this to policy discretion. And a counter voice, Michel Foucault's governmentality, to caution that population-level protection can also become a form of management, not just liberation. That layering, concept, evidence in brief, counterthinker, synthesis, is what an examiner is scanning for. The question to prepare in the light of the Supreme Court's Victim Protection Plan for Trafficking Survivors. Critically examine Partha Chatterjee's distinction between civil society and political society as a framework for state-citizen relations in India. Practice writing this in 25 minutes, no more. Let us bring this together in 3 points. 1. Max Weber's formal versus substantive rationality distinction is what turns a story about artificial intelligence in a tribunal into a 20-mark sociology answer. 2. Partha Chatterjee's civil society versus political society distinction is what turns a news item about a Supreme Court judgment into a rich paper 2 answer on the state and marginalized populations. 3. In both cases, the discipline is identical. Name the concept first, use the event in a sentence or two, add a counterthinker, and close by returning to your opening claim. Practice that sequence until it becomes automatic.
That is today's brief.
I know, the road to this examination is long, and some days the syllabus feels heavier than it did yesterday. But the aspirants who keep this daily habit of pairing a live event with a named thinker are the ones who walk into the examination hall with answers already half written in their heads. If you would like the complete answer blocks, the model answers, and the examiner notes behind everything we discussed today, drop your email in the comments or write to us at team@upscdesk.com and we will share the subscription details. Take care of yourself today, and I will see you tomorrow.